At the end of the day, this is a people business, and you take care of the people you work for. You represent them every day in a professional way, and generally happy with the service we provide here at LMA. And I've enjoyed every minute of it. I got to do it for 20 years in the West, and it's something I'll cherish forever.
That was Forest Mangan, new CEO of the Livestock Marketing Association, and we're going to be hearing from him in just a little bit, talking about who exactly Forest Mangan is. We're also going to be hearing what is going to be happening with LMA. Of course, they have their big annual convention coming up in Deadwood, June 17th through the 20th. We'll be hearing all about that here in a little bit, but we're going to be having a great discussion about a lot of different things. We're going to be talking the markets. We're going to be talking top headlines with our very own Colter Brown, Ag Director at Northern Ag Network, and Colton Young, also with us today, Ag Broadcaster with Northern Ag Network, here on Next Year Country. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Doing good, Andy. Thanks for leading off the intro for our inaugural podcast here. First episode of Next Year Country.
We finally made it. We're here.
We're here. Yes, Next Year Country. Of course, Next Year Country, something that you understand in the farming and ranching industry here in the Northern Ag Territory, because some years are not that good, and you can kind of see that with the way the wheat crop's looking for some of these producers. But hey, there's always next year, and that's kind of where we're basing off of Next Year Country. But it's going to be a great weekly series coming up for you guys to enjoy. And of course, we couldn't do it without our sponsors. And from Montana fields to global markets, BNSF Railway plays a critical role in moving our grain. Their commitment to efficiency helps agriculture keep strong across the region. BNSF, huge partner in ag industry across all of Northern Ag Territory. But boy, oh boy, gentlemen, we have had a lot happen here in the last couple of weeks. When you talk about, some of these top headlines, which we'll get into next, and then we talked about some of the markets in a little bit. But before we get into that, this hockey season's starting to come to a close, boys. You knew I was going to bring it up.
Colton and I to sleep pretty fast on hockey. If you want to talk, Broncos, what's going to happen here with OTAs? Oh man,
yeah, go Colorado Avalanche into the Western Conference Final for the first time since 2022 when they won the Stanley Cup.
There's always next year, Andy.
There's always next year. That's what we tell our Minnesota Wild fans, anyways. Sorry, Augie Aga.
Well, Andy, I think we should spend a minute on the title of our podcast here, Next Year Country. For anyone from Montana or Wyoming, they know what Next Year Country means. Like you said at the beginning there, we live it a lot of years. It feels like that. Next year will be better. And we spent a lot of time debating what should we call this podcast. A lot of names were thrown out there. Personally, I thought Only Farms was a really good option, but then the Trump administration stole that for their website, so we couldn't use that. But I thought Next Year Country really epitomizes what it means to work in agriculture in this part of the world, where you fight drought and snowstorms sometimes in the same year, and that's what we wanted to bring to this: the optimism that next year will be better, that things are going to improve and change. And so I hope that kind of provides an insight into the type of conversations we're hoping to have here.
I think a really exciting part about it is, every time that we go to conventions and we're traveling throughout our year, we always, when we get back in the vehicle and we're traveling back, it's that was just, they're so optimistic. Producers are always just looking forward to what's to come, despite the challenges that we talked about whatever convention we're at. And I think it just provided a lot of insight for us, and I'm really excited to see where this goes and hope that we can kind of provide some further insight. I'm also excited just because we get to dive into these conversations just a little bit deeper than what people normally get to hear on the radio. So hoping to provide some insight and, of course, some banter and some speculation. I'm sure we'll get Colter on a track here soon and talk some speculation.
I do like to speculate wildly at times, so I think there'll be opportunity for this. And want to give a tip of the cap to Colton. I think, Colton's been with us for about a year and a half now, and he's been the one that's kind of pushed us to get this off the ground with our Next Year Country podcast. So appreciate that, Colton. If you don't like what you hear, you can also blame Colton for it. So that's handy.
That's what we do in the office anyways, every day. But Colton doesn't know it because we don't say it to his face, but
it's fine. I'm used to it. It's all good.
Well, good. Well, before we get into the show here, thought we might kind of explain how we're planning on structuring this. Of course, this is our first one, so things might change, but the idea is to give you a little bit of behind-the-scenes look of some of the conversations we're having as we go through some of these news stories. Of course, you're hearing a lot of these on the radio or social media, wherever we're sharing the information, but give us a chance to have a little more in-depth conversation about some of these stories. Obviously, we're going to have some great interviews as a part part of this. We're going to talk to a lot of producers, industry insiders. That'll be a lot of fun. And then, of course, this is Northern Ag Network. We talk about what's going on with these markets and really dig in and provide some insight, hopefully, on where these markets are sitting and where they might go in the future. So that's sort of how I see the show going. I mean, guys, anything that you're hoping to get out of this?
I think a big takeaway for me is it's just an opportunity to kind of hear our extended thoughts. And that's something we can't necessarily provide on our other daily platforms, but you also just get to hear us dive in a little further, talk a little deeper, maybe hear a different perspective that you don't normally get to fit into a radio segment, and just kind of carry that conversation on. And really that adds a lot of value of just hearing what we think and how people can kind of get a different perspective on all of these ag issues and headlines and markets. And there's always different key things that some people look at that some others kind of forget about. So just overall, just kind of round us out and make sure we're staying up to date and seeing all sides of things.
Yeah, I was going to say kind of the same thing there, Colton. It's just, we have 15 radio programs on a daily basis. Some of them range from 2 minutes long to 9 minutes long. And so we don't have a lot of opportunity to dive terribly deep into some of the markets, some of the things that we want to. We can only give you kind of a synopsis of every issue that we're talking about. But this gives us that opportunity to really dive in, dig out the nuts and bolts of this situation that we're talking about, and kind of really tell you what it means, what it's going to mean to your operation, to the farmers and ranchers in the Northern Ag Territory and beyond, probably.
And the good news, folks, if you're listening, we can't get on too many long diatribes because we still have our radio programs to produce. Colton's still got to go do the market news summary, so we can't talk all day here. Well, and with that, so let's get into some of the news here. Before we do, though, want to thank another one of our sponsors supporting us here. Our next segment is going to be sponsored by the Montana Farm Bureau Federation. Of course, next month, we're going to be in Kalispell attending the Montana Farm Bureau Summer Conference. That'll be June 15th through the 17th. A great chance to see producers from across the state get over to an area that they don't often have the summer conference there in the Flathead. Going to talk about all things that matter to agriculture. Of course, a lot of good policy discussions that'll happen there. Some fun as well with the foundation banquet fundraiser they have there. That's every Tuesday night during the summer conference. That'll be June 16th. It's a lot of fun. We appreciate what Farm Bureau does to support agriculture. If you want to attend the summer conference, be sure to check it out, mfbf.org. And with that, we're going to dig into a couple of the big stories here that are affecting agriculture, just a few that I pulled out. And like I said, I'm sure you've heard us talk about them on the radio. One big one that really had some reverberations through the market and certainly made ranchers concerned was when the Trump administration was reportedly going to sign an executive order to suspend tariffs on beef imports. The idea being that they're concerned about the price of beef and want to see it come down and want to put more supply on the market. Now, obviously, that doesn't sit too well with ranchers to talk about importing more beef and trying to fix our market and bring prices down. So that news broke. The futures market immediately took a dive downwards, and then we found out that was going to be delayed. They haven't said they're not going to do it, just that they're fine-tuning their plan to lower beef prices. Guys, that gets people worked up whenever we talk about beef imports on the radio. Curious for your takes on this and what is going to happen. I guess this is the part where we speculate wildly.
I think this was taken much better than when it was in October. If you remember back in October, this was also announced that they were going to be bringing in double the amount of Argentine beef, and the markets just had a huge crash for about a month and a half, if I remember right. And so it was a very tough situation for the markets to see how much of that pullback, because it almost erased completely all the profits and the increases that we saw in 2026 in less than a month by one announcement. This one was less, and possibly because they did decide to suspend the idea for the moment. Like you said, we very well could see this continue. But at the same time, you look at the latest Farm Bureau Market Intel report, beef per pound is the highest it's ever been. It's up 13% from last year, right at $10 a pound on the overall average for beef. Do we have to do something for the consumer? Absolutely. I think the consumer is the deciding factor here. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be importing beef, but I'm also saying that we shouldn't be importing copious amounts of beef into the markets to drive the cattle prices down.
It almost felt like a squirrel announcement of what we've seen the past few weeks. There's been a lot of news in the White House recently. You take the Iran deal, the visits with China, and then this just kind of came out to the surface, and then it was suspended, and we haven't really heard anything since. And so I think that just shows the volatility levels that we can see in the marketplace right now. But I think we can't lose sight of the fact that if we're talking about suspending these tariffs, look at the amount of beef we're importing. Is it really going to affect the price on the shelves? I don't think it's going to as as much as they think it will. That's just I don't know how to say it. It's a fix on paper, but will it actually make a difference on the shelf? Probably not.
It would take a tremendous amount of beef imports, which I would say we're already importing a tremendous amount of beef. We're all on pace to have a record amount this year. How much more of a record do we need to set when it comes to beef imports? And obviously, our beef production is down, and so we are going to import more beef. We've culled the cow herd so dramatically, we need to import lean grinding beef so we can have ground beef for everybody. So imports have their place in this market, but boy, jacking them up considerably, I'm not sure if that's going to be the answer. And Andy, you brought up a good point. Everyone remembers last fall when they surfaced this idea about importing more beef from Argentina. That completely wrecked the market. We were at record highs the day before the president makes that announcement, and the market tanked. And in about 6 weeks, the price of calves dropped $300 a head. I mean, these are real world impacts. It costs guys money when they just surface that idea. And we are importing more beef from Argentina. To Colton's point, not a considerable amount, not anything that's had any sort of effect, because Andy just told us we have record high beef prices still.
I don't want to be an echo chamber, but like you said, Colton, I mean, you're going to have to import a pile of beef. And if you're going to ask me, this would be the year that if you're for mandatory country of origin labeling, this is your year to really beat that drum, because this is the year that we're seeing record imports, and people do want to know where their beef is coming from at the end of the day.
I can see from a demand side point on what we're producing right now in the U.S., the need for more lean ground beef, and we can talk about that when we get to the markets later on, but don't want to keep us stalled on this for too long. But I think we can round out and come back to that a little bit, just because I have some different facts that I want to talk about on where we're sitting at from a demand perspective and how just tight our lean beef supplies truly are. So maybe this is one of those issues that could help us out a little bit.
Could well be. I'm not going to take Andy's bait on cool and sit here for another hour and debate that. But one last point I want to make on this, because at the same time we heard about the executive order to cut tariffs, they said they were going to have another executive order, and this one was weird. It felt like just, token bait for the Cowboys to keep them happy, and here's some of the details we've learned. The other executive order was going to have some language about reducing protections for wolves. It was going to remove the mandate on electronic ID tags that's been in place for about a year and a half now, and then increasing access for small business administration loans. None of those are bad things, so don't get me wrong. It doesn't really affect us when it comes to wolves in Montana, Wyoming, because they've been delisted for 15 years. And I don't know a rancher that's had an SBA loan before. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I'm just not aware of it, but it felt odd to me that they were going to put out this other one, keep the ranchers happy, but we're going to bring in more beef. That's an interesting dynamic. Obviously, it didn't happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do see that both of those orders come out at some point this year.
I think they're going to come out soon. Again, the whole squirrel moment that I think we saw, it just kind of just came about. There was no leading up to it, and then here we are a week and a half later, and we haven't heard or seen anything else. So was it just like a tease? Are they foreshadowing us a little bit on what's to come? Like you said, does it really affect us right now? That doesn't appear to.
Could it be election related?
Could be.
Don't want to make agriculture mad. I don't know. Again, that's speculating wildly here. That can be a segment we have here, speculating wildly with Colter. I love to do it.
Need a sponsor for it.
Moving on, though, something that I think is positive news for the ranching industry, and certainly those that graze upon public lands. We have seen a pile of news out of the BLM in just the last couple of weeks here. Honestly, we're going to have to dedicate an episode to some of those changes, but just wanted to highlight them real quickly. And guys, I'll have you jump in here as well. But obviously, something we've been talking about going back to the Biden administration was the public lands rule that really would have made conservation on public lands a land use, whereas most of us would consider conservation an outcome of what we do on public lands. It would have created conservation leasings, increased the use of areas of critical environmental concern designations, and really met broad pushback from not just the ranching industry, but many of the multiple uses upon public lands. So that rule was officially rescinded here just about a week ago, and I think very positive for our ranchers, anyone that's for the multiple use on public land. So that was one item. And then there's even more. Andy, you're going to have to get Caitlin Glover on the phone to break down what's in this updated grazing rule. There's a lot of stuff packed into that, but I think it's going to be positive for the industry.
Huge. And it's a huge package, like you mentioned. I mean, this is the first update to the grazing rule that we've seen in 30 plus years. And so there's a lot going into this. Right now, it's only in a proposed draft at the moment. It's not a final decision, so they're taking public comments on it. There's a lot to dive through. I can't even remember how many pages it is, but it is very in-depth. Like you said, it is certainly focused towards making sure that that grazing is going to be put first and foremost, as it should be on these lands, but not overgrazing. I mean, there's going to be rules set in place where you're not going to be able to just turn them out and come back in October and gather them up of whatever's left that for them to eat.
Well, and a couple things that are included in that, it seems to be trying to get decisions made closer to the land, being able to work with your local BLM staff. So I think that's beneficial. Looking at these rangeland health standards, something that the livestock industry's had to adhere to, making sure that applies to all users on public land. So I think that's a positive, certainly one we're going to be digging into more and probably will be coming to you with an expert to help us dig through that. Other news out of the BLM, just to highlight it real quickly, we officially do have a BLM director. First one we've had in, well, I guess since the Biden administration, since Tracy Stone Manning. So Stephen Pierce of New Mexico is going to be is our new BLM director. And then another episode we're going to have here on Next Year Country is going to have to concern the American Prairie grazing allotments that were officially rescinded by the BLM here earlier this month. So that's obviously a huge issue in Montana. A lot of sides on that, certainly. Anytime we talk about it on Facebook, it just blows up. So that's an issue that we're going to dig into because it matters greatly to Montana ranchers.
You'd almost think we need to do an episode just on the Facebook comments and just go through, but you wouldn't believe the controversy.
I feel like it would make me dumber.
Wouldn't even have to speculate.
Well, the last topic, and somewhat connected to that, is this issue, and this is another long-term one, of corner crossing. We've heard about it for a number of years. Actually started in Carbon County, Wyoming, when hunters used a ladder device to corner cross. So if you can think of how the section lines come together, when you've got public sections that touch at the corner and then private sections at the opposite corner, hunters used a ladder to climb over that and stay on the public land. This brought a long legal case. The landowner sued, lost, took it to district court, lost there, appealed again, and the appeals court ruled that corner crossing is legal. But that's just in that district. So in Montana, the guidance has been provided from the state. Lieutenant Governor Kristen Juras said, no, corner crossing is illegal here. It's under a different appeals court in Montana. And so you cannot corner cross, especially from state sections. So that's the other issue. Is it federal land or is it state land? It's getting extremely complicated if you're able to follow along. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Director Christy Clark backed that up and said, no, corner crossing is not legal in Montana. Well, shortly thereafter, a lawsuit's filed challenging that process, saying rulemaking should have happened. I don't know legally what's going on there. I do know, I remember 25 years ago in hunter safety being told you cannot corner cross. I thought it was just cut and dry. That's the way the law is. But apparently there's plenty of gray area when it comes to corner crossing.
It is very interesting. It's a very big gray area, like you said, because, I mean, you think about it. You put four corners together. You put four pieces of paper together. Those corners, they touch at every little corner. So how much airspace are you going to give to cross that corner? Is it airspace that you give, or is it land? Because you can't fly a helicopter. You can't fly an aircraft under 500 feet over somebody's private property. So is it going to be that ladder has to be 500 feet in the air and come back down? I mean, where do we draw the line? And you also brought up a huge point there. Not only the fact that Wyoming, where this originated, was in one federal district court, whereas Montana's in a different federal district. So we got two totally different opinions going to be coming at that point. But the biggest part, in my opinion, like you touch on, is the one that's saying in Montana that you can't do this. And so they probably have a legal standing there because it's state ground, not federal ground. So the federal judges aren't going to be able to rule on that, whereas they could on the BLM and the Forest Service land and Bureau of Rec land, all the federal lands, obviously. So this is going to be needing to be watched very closely, but interesting how they're going after the state. And I think Montana did a pretty good job of it just being a state issue, not necessarily a federal issue.
Well, and it's something that's going to continue to come up. We already saw it in the Wyoming legislature earlier this year. I guarantee you there will be legislation in the Montana legislature in 2027.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, like you said, it's just one of those things. It's gray area. You just need to get a yes or a no. I feel like it's as simple as that. You just got to find out what's legal, what's not. But again, another one of those topics, a lot of controversy. And it's going to take some time to hear all of the input from different groups, different producers, landowners, and see really where this ends up. I'm curious to see how long of a process it's actually going to be. I feel like we get some of these topics that are very controversial and we don't have an answer for several years. And that could lead to more gray area just overall.
Yep. Seems like that'll be the case.
Yeah, and I want to just go real quick, just back to Steve Pierce, like you were talking about earlier. He's, as you mentioned, a former U.S. representative from New Mexico. But along with that, before his time there, he worked in the oil field. And it's it's going to be interesting to see if somebody from the oil field can come in and kind of curb this this oil situation that we're in right now with this war in Iran. If you'd ask me, I would think that drill baby drill would be the purpose of everybody behind the Department of Interior. And so what are they going to do to get more drilling leases, more oil production off of these federal lands right now at a time where everybody would love to see more oil to bring down the gas prices?
Well, that's going to wrap up this week's Ag Issues. Of course, that was brought to us by our friends at the Montana Farm Bureau Federation. And now we're ready to dive into our first interview on Next Year Country podcast with Andy Schwab and Forest Mangan with the Livestock Marketing Association. But our interview this week is brought to us by Cameron Bumgardner at Two Gun Western Apparel. Two Gun Western Apparel, your one-stop shop for all your Western apparel needs, with everything possible that can be made in America, stitched and handcrafted under one roof in Joliet, Montana. Two Gun is proudly veteran-owned and operated, serving the agriculture and Western lifestyle right under the beautiful Big Sky country. Two Gun was started from scratch in a double-wide trailer in Carbon County and has since grown to a large facility serving farmers, ranchers, and everybody else, not just in Carbon and Yellowstone County, but nationwide. A brand rooted in agriculture to better serve the apparel the working man deserves. Learn more and find out the new apparel at twogunwesternapparel.com.
Back again here as we're speaking with Forest Mangan, CEO of the Livestock Marketing Association. Of course, LMA had started back in 1947 as a national member-led professional organization that works as an advocate for the livestock marketing industry and provides a voice on the state and federal legislative and regulatory issues. Forest, probably no real stranger to the West here, as he actually served as the regional executive officer, which covers states like Montana and Wyoming, all the way out to California and up to Alberta, that is, and down in New Mexico and Arizona. Now that person serving in that role, you guys all know Mr. Devin Mernon. And starting off, Forrest, I guess let's just talk a little bit. What are some of those things that you learned being here in the West Region executive officer position that kind of helped carry over into the CEO position?
Well, I think, first, and thank you again for having me on. And you're correct. Devin Mernon has stepped in the West and doing an incredible job, and we appreciate all the work he does. But, I think it starts with the people I got to work with. I mean, you talk about these market auction operators and the dealers you work with. I mean, they're salt of the earth. They're great people. So it sure makes your job a lot easier when you're dealing with great people. But, the biggest thing that, over the years is just you wake up every day and you have the sense of duty to help your members out. And, they live it, they breathe it, they sweat it every day. And my job at that time as the regional executive officer was to make their life a little easier. Whatever the issue may be, from whether it's, industry issues to dealing with packers and stockyards to insurance related, was to be there to be a helping hand. And, at the end of the day, this is a people business. No matter how you look at anything, we're in a people business, and you take care of the people you work for. You represent them every day in a professional way, and generally happy with the service we provide here at LMA. And, I've enjoyed every minute of it. I got to do it for 20 years in the West, and it's something I'll cherish forever, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of great faces across the West. Forrest, maybe I should back up here just a little bit and kind of get your background, where you grew up, where you went to college, kind of what are your roots?
Okay, yeah. I am a California native, now a proud Kansan, but my family, we grew up in the foothills of Northern California, east of Sacramento, about 60 miles. We had probably a average size cattle operation, which you'd consider average today. And at one point, my sister and I both had our own cows, and left to college. I sold everything to pay for college. I made a quick pit stop at Delta Junior College. Was on the livestock judging team there. From there, I went to Cal Poly and got my major in ag business. And then I had the great opportunity of coaching the livestock judging team at Cal Poly for 2 years. So it was something I'll never forget. I learned a lot from it. While doing that, I taught the livestock evaluation class, and then also got to, when the beef, sheep, or swine professors were out, I got to teach the labs in those classes, which was a great time. But, I always look back on that opportunity, and it kind of taught me a lot. I kind of laugh sometimes. You hope those that are on the team when you're coaching learned a lot, learned how you evaluate cattle. But, I think I learned more probably than them when you think about learning how to deal with different personalities and, learning how to run a program, if you will, and then also the fun politics of universities. And so I did that for 2 years, enjoyed every minute. And then I got a call from Mark Mackey, who was the previous CEO, with the opportunity to basically take over the Western United States as a regional executive officer. And so jump forward 20 years. Now I'm back in Kansas and I have this, I just call it a very humbling opportunity to lead this association that I truly love and has done so much for me and my family. And it's really exciting. And I look forward to what the future brings.
Yeah, well, speaking of that future, let's kind of want to do that. Just fast forward, as LMA CEO now, and we mentioned earlier, you and the team work to advocate for the livestock marketing industry and provide a voice on the state and federal legislative and regulatory issues. What would you say are some of those legislative priorities that you guys have maybe top on your list right now?
Well, right now, obviously we're looking at a few things. You're in terms of not making legislation, but you're following some issues that are pretty pertinent to our industry. Obviously, following screwworm, which you guys have heard a lot about, obviously, and the industry has. And so we're following that. And with that, we've been involved in the meetings with state and federal officials. You want to find a balance of, the health of the cattle herd, the animal health, also with the economic vitality of the livestock industry to keep speed of commerce going. So it's trying to find that balance and then kind of where the auction markets fit. When it comes to, I know one of the discussions we talked about is animal ID. For us, that if they're going to have a mandate, it should be a funded mandate. So we continue to push for that. And then constantly just looking at issues that come up. But those would be kind of two of the top of the order right now that we've been involved in.
I think another main focal point, I know speaking with the Montana stock growers at their recent Ag Labor Summit, which LMA was a sponsor of, we talked a lot about ag labor in the livestock, the stockyards, the auction barns. Of course, it's a big challenge across the entire ag industry, farm and cattle side, either way. But what are you seeing right now? I know a big push was reform to the H2 programs. And, we just recently saw the Farm Bill passed, and we saw that the House Ag Committee talk about after that Farm Bill is passed, the next obstacle to kind of conquer and look at is going to be ag labor. I'm curious, what are you seeing right now? Is there any movement? Are those conversations starting to happen in DC, or are we still having to push from our grassroots organizations?
Well, I think a push from grassroots producers is always needed, no matter what policy you're looking at. I think the more grassroots push you have, the legislators will listen to that and hear that. For auction markets, labor's always been a big issue. And certainly we have a lot of auction markets that sell one day a week. And to find some, labor to come in and just work that one day can be challenging sometimes. Then you jump to the H2A. Currently, the definition under H2A, livestock auction markets cannot have H2A labor, the way it defines what production agriculture is. And so for us on that end, for the auction markets, we'd love to see the definition change to allow the auction markets to have H2A labor.
It's such a fine line that it seems they're kind of crossing between the H2A and the H2B programs, because at that Ag Labor Summit, we were talking with Public Auction Yards and Billings Livestock here, and they were talking about because, the auction barns don't own the cattle, that's why they don't qualify for the H2A. But on the H2B side, they kind of qualify. However, the construction and the other industries kind of take precedence over that. So they don't qualify for one and they get kicked down the line in the other. So is it just a definition change that needs to occur, or what's the big push? What change would you like to see first?
Yeah, for the H2A, I think there's, obviously, if you talk to a lot of the industry groups, maybe there's some other tweaks that they'd like. But for us on our end, very specifically, just to change it or even just to add livestock auction markets to the language for H2A would be the fix for us on our end.
Sure. Well, getting you off the policy items for a second, I'm just curious of what you're seeing in this cattle market right now, what you're hearing from your membership across the country. It's a very interesting point that our cattle industry sits at right now, where cow-calf producers are as profitable as they've ever been and are enjoying some good times. But boy, you talk to producers out in the country right now, they're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. And then we've got drought that's affecting over 2/3 of our cow herd across the country right now. So as you talk to your members, the auction markets across the nation, what are they feeling in this cattle market right now?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. You kind of said everything I'd probably say. It's incredible right now. And people ask, I wish I could predict the future, but the economics of supply and demand would tell you the prices stay high. But, there's also still the concern where we are losing producers each year. If I were to go to the markets, certainly in the West and ask them to look at their consignor list year over year from the last 10 years, you're definitely seeing a drop in the amount of producers that are out there. And so, that's a huge concern of ours. But yeah, there's, producers should be getting healed up right now. And these prices have been incredible and the demand's incredible. And try not to pinch ourselves, I guess. But it's the challenging is moving forward is building this, this cow herd back, or, slightly. I don't know if we're going to see a big jump, but the barriers to entry into this industry, certainly for like the young and emerging producers, is really challenging. Just, access to land, access to capital is, and it as good as anybody up in your neck of the woods, to get land or buy a ranch up there is nearly impossible for a young producer. Yeah,
it's a tough challenge for sure. And speaking of up in our neck of the woods, I know you guys are going to be coming up here this summer. It's about a month away now, actually. It's the annual Livestock Marketing Association annual meeting, going to be happening in Deadwood, June 17th through the 20th. Also, the World Auctioneer Competition. We'll talk about that in a minute. But, you mentioned the grassroots earlier, but why is it so important that some of these producers and some of these livestock market owners make their way to Deadwood, June 17th through the 20th?
Well, I think a lot of times when we talk about our convention and WLAC, a lot of the talk is who the world champion is going to be, and while that caps the week off, and it's incredibly important, and for the individual that wins, it's life changing. But at the end of the day, the real work happens Wednesday through Friday, where we're setting policy while we're there, or we are in the discussion of what policy might come down the road. And so, I think one of the big, for us and Mike Van Manen, our current president, which, as Joe Goggins will be going president come June, is one of his big pushes as president was to get more membership involved, have more voices of our membership when we're making policy. And so what we've done in the last few years is we used to have 3 committees. We bumped that to 6. And so if you talk about the people on the committee, we went from 24 members to 48 members that sit on different committees within our structure to help bring policy forward. And so, we're the big push, and it's so important for them to be engaged and their voices to be heard. It's important. Like, we want to know what our members want, what they expect from us. And that's, I'll kind of jump forward that week. And, a big push of mine is what does the future look like for LMA? And so we've kind of started a process with our leadership and some of our members at large, building a strategic plan, kind of basically setting a roadmap for the future. And we started with a SOAR analysis, which we'll wrap that up at Deadwood, and then from there build off into our strategic plan. But it'll be very interesting to hear from our members who want to know, what we do good, what we can do better at, or maybe some areas that, maybe we need to expand to. And so at the end of the day, our job is to provide the services to our members to allow them to have a successful business.
The details available at lmaweb.com. Great opportunity for you guys to get to Deadwood. Not very often that the WLAC championship comes to the Northern Ag Territory. It's been a few years. And Forrest, appreciate your time today, and look forward to possibly seeing you in Deadwood and there in Justin Tupper's country for the LMA competition.
Yeah, Justin and his whole crew, it's putting on an auctioneer contest is not the easiest thing, and they're working tirelessly, and we really appreciate what they're doing.
That's going to wrap us up with Forest Mangan, CEO of Livestock Marketing Association. As mentioned, you can find the details for their annual convention happening in Deadwood, June 17th through the 20th at lmaweb.com.
Well, thanks, Andy, and thank you, Forrest, for being the inaugural guest here on the Next Year Country podcast. Boy, he didn't really know what he was in for there, but appreciate you, Forrest, for being a part of this. We're going to look at what's going on in some of these markets, but first, want to thank another one of our sponsors, Nutrilix. Nutrilix liquid supplement is specifically formulated to provide the nutrients your cattle need to maintain good health and provide a returnable income on your investment, especially in these summer drought conditions. We're fighting it all across the region, so nutrition and these supplements are going to make a huge difference. It's easier and cheaper to supplement grass now than it is to feed excess hay later. So we appreciate the Yost family and Nutrilix for sponsoring here on Next Year Country. And that brings us to the markets. And Colton Young's going to kick things off. We already kind of teased some of the stuff he wants to talk about with what's going on in these markets. Colton, where are we starting? Cattle or grain?
Boy, let's start with cattle, and I think we could just spend all day here talking about it. We talk all the time in our office in the mornings, and we just speculate on all the reports and what the markets have done the past day. There's just so much to look at right now, and of course, we talk about we're in unprecedented times, so we're seeing record high prices, but on the flip side, the volatility is high, so we're seeing that pressure come from all directions, and there's just so much to dive into. But what I really want to start on, we kind of saw the first glimpse of the summer video sale season as Northern Livestock kicked off the video sale summer season with their first ever early bird special. They had over 13,000 head of cattle sell in Billings on Tuesday. And wow, it was just absolutely impressive. I don't think we could have imagined prices to be strong. Of course, when the video sales season kicked off last year, I remember talking, wow, these prices are up 20 to 30%. And well, they just continued to climb here. Talking with Ty Thompson with Northern Livestock, some of those prices that I thought were really a highlight. He said they had over 6,000 head of grass cattle come in. Of course, they had this early bird special due to drought conditions in the region, so we're probably going to see a lot of those early marketing cattle come through. Some of the highlights, they had some heavier 4-weight steers that were just under $6 a pound, came in at $5.92 to $5.93. 580-pound steers for early fall delivery, $491. 600-pound steers for immediate delivery at $491. That's just over $3,300 a head. Wow. $3,300 for those steers. And that was for those immediate delivery. Of course, we know that supply chain is tight right now. But as we get into June, July, August, those late summer, early fall delivery, they were still anywhere from $26,000 to $3,000 a head on those steers. The heifers, just as strong. Of course, we normally start the season off. We see kind of a wider range. It narrows out as we get closer to the fall. But 5-weight heifers, 5.25 to 532. 600-pound heifers, a top of 458. So again, $2,200 to $2,600 for those heifers. What a way to kick off the video sale season.
Wow. No one really knows how it's ever going to start off. I mean, obviously, we've seen this calf market still trading at record highs, and the spring is typically your seasonal highs, but yowzer. I mean, it's hard to compare, but I did look back at last June's sale, which isn't really a one-to-one comparison, but you're still up 30% in price. And I think we were up 20 to 30% from 2024. So it's just unreal to see what these calf prices are doing. Obviously, the demand is there. We're tight on supplies for a variety of reasons. And boy, I know guys are uncertain about what this summer is going to shape up to be. As dry as it is, we know we're probably going to have to wean early. Are the calves going to come in light? It's a lot of stress on producers, but boy, it makes it a little easier when you're talking prices like, what was that, $2,800, $2,900 for a 5-6 weight steer? Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, it's absolutely impressive. And speaking with Ty Thompson, he was saying that, again, in this standpoint in the market, we can't get too greedy. Obviously, if there's a shortage on grass, we know feed's going to be an issue this year, and we start to see those expenses kind of creep up here in the summertime. So if you have to bump up your marketing early, go ahead and do that. These are phenomenal prices that you were locking in for your operation. Of course, last year we saw, I feel like, an early marketing come through in the first June sales, and then August they were $30 a head, more expensive, and guys were kind of kicking themselves. But it's a good opportunity. The market is very strong, and I think with the prolonged drought conditions that we're going to see, it kind of just puts the cap on if there's going to be any herd expansion. So I think we can kind of see this carry out through the whole season.
Did you hear how I called that comparison this morning on the morning market report?
No, I didn't.
There was like a green apple versus red apple comparison. It's apples to apples, but it's, different.
They're not the same kind of apples.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And if you head over to YouTube, you can see Colton's interview with Ty Thompson from yesterday. Colton, I'm curious, but might have you, explain what Ty said with these yearlings. A lot of them, with these drought conditions, these yearlings are coming early. Does that mean we're not going to have the same supply that we'd usually see on, the June or July sales?
Yeah, he did note that was kind of a big push here. And when they were having the conversations of having an early bird special to get that first sale early on, they expected to see some yearlings come through, and they got a lot more than what they anticipated. Most of those they sell in that late summer, early fall sale. So yeah, I think, what Ty was kind of talking about is we're going to see some of those marketings pushed up a little bit. Again, it depends on what part of the country they're coming from. I thought yesterday or in the video sale, there was a good test of Wyoming calves that were coming through. Of course, we know struggling really bad down there in southern Wyoming with some drought conditions. So not as surprised to see those calves marketed pretty early, but as far as the yearling market goes, we could see them hit early pretty fast. And then as we get into that fall time, might not see the head counts that we normally do. And I thought last fall we were shorter than normal anyway. So just imagine what it's going to be like this year.
You mentioned Wyoming. I was just in Saratoga, Wyoming, just last week talking to some of the ranchers at a, believe it or not, golf tournament. But anyways, they were asking me, do you know where to find hay? Have you heard anybody that has hay? And granted, Southeast Wyoming just this last week did get a little bit of moisture and in the form of snow, but it was actually equivalent to about 2 inches of rain in snow form. So it slow melts in. It doesn't exactly run off. Yeah, I will say on my road trip down to Saratoga, it was like you get into Muddy Gap and you're kind of like, what's this green stuff around here? It hasn't been this green in this country for a long time. So maybe just a touch of relief in that area. But as you see in, different auction markets as well, Torrington Livestock just last week selling over 6,000 head in the ring. I think another 3,000 online for a total of 9,000 head on a spring sale. That's just unheard of. But the drought conditions are just absolutely wreaking havoc across the Cowboy State.
Well, on the flip side of that, look at the coal cow market right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. Even the bulls, the slaughter bulls, they're up north of $5,000 a head for a slaughter bull. So why wouldn't you? If you're short on grass, take advantage of the high market and do some steep culling. Obviously, make those decisions carefully, but you can get some really good profit off of those for making that decision. I'm glad you brought up the hay, because I think just in the last 2 weeks here in Billings, I've seen more hay trucks coming up and down the road in May more than I've ever seen before. I mean, they're hauling it in, they're getting it now. So curious to see what that market does. But keep on rolling here with the markets a little bit. Some interesting perspective, I think, in the latest cattle facts update. And you and I were just talking earlier today, Colter. Daryl Peel had a good perspective on the Packers and what we're seeing from a demand perspective, and how we're feeding cattle right now, and what our domestic herd is kind of making up right now. And we look at the choice cutout, the box beef values, and again today, select values were above choice. And it's kind of typical every once in a while to see that, but I think we've seen it more in the last month than we ever have really before. There's a 4-day stretch where select was higher than choice values, and it's not only just a grading factor, we're grading higher than we ever have before. I think choice right now, we're over 73% of all cattle are grading choice, 15% prime, and that's at a 10-to-1 ratio. So for every 10 cows, one is grading select, the others are choice. Just 5 years ago, that was a 5-to-1 ratio. So that shows you the difference in what we're seeing right now. And that kind of also brings in our import conversation that we had earlier. Why is the select value, why are they staying so close to choice? And it's because we have such a shortage of that lean beef. Because we're grading so high, we're getting the high quality beef that we don't have enough of that lean beef. And so because the supplies are low and the demand is record high, we're starting to see that really, really narrow on the gap.
Well, and one of the things that affects that select price, and obviously what's about 10, 12% of the beef is select, so it's a relatively small amount, but one of the things that affects it are institutional buying. So I mean things like schools, hospitals, prisons. They don't serve prime beef there.
Yep.
They're required to buy the cheapest beef, which is typically select. So that buying is kind of always there, but suddenly the supply isn't there, and now it's doing this weird thing of driving the price higher. So I don't think it's a demand issue where people don't want quality beef. That is not the case, but there's just not the supply of select. And so maybe the choice select spread just doesn't really mean what it used to.
And I think another factor that we have to weigh in here too is how long these cattle are staying on feed. Look at the carcass weights when they go to the packer as well. The carcass weights are higher right now. The on feed days are a little bit more. You're seeing that when you are able to feed out a steer just another 2-3 weeks, whatever it may be, you're going to see that increase in marbling just that much more. And I think that's kind of playing into the fact that we're seeing more prime beef, we're seeing more choice, and we're seeing a little bit less select.
You bet. Good point, Andy.
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see, it's going to circle around, one, the consumer demand. We haven't found any resistance levels yet, so I think we're going to see that spread kind of narrow as our lean beef supply continues to tighten, but we'll see if we do get any point of herd retention going on here within the next year. We could start to see it come back again, but as for now, I think we're going to be really close in that choice and select spread. But overall, I think, the cattle markets, we're sitting in a historic time right now as we head into summer. We got an early test of the video season. I think that provided a lot of optimism for producers, knowing that the calf crop is going to be very valuable this year. Of course, on the market fundamentals, we'll have the latest cattle on feed report coming out here. And so we can dive into that a little bit next week and see what news comes out, see if there's any herd retention coming on. Of course, we had the quarterly report last month, so a little less information on this one, but excited to see where that goes. Meanwhile, on the grain side, this might have been one of the most impressive 2-week span that we've seen in the last 3 years or so for the wheat side, as we got the latest World Ag Supply and Demand Estimates report from the USDA that said this is going to be the lowest winter wheat crop since 1972. Production down 25% year over year at just over 1 billion bushels. Harvested winter wheat acres, they're expected to be 32.9 million compared to 37 last year.
Well, and obviously what drives the bus on the winter wheat market is what happens down in the southern plains in Kansas and Oklahoma, the Texas Panhandle, Nebraska to some degree. And it sounds like conditions are pretty bad down there. They had the hard red winter wheat tour that the Wheat Quality Council puts on. I think they said the average yield, Colton, you probably know, 38.9
was the official result of that. But what I thought was interesting on that winter wheat tour is they said that over 25% of that winter wheat crop has been abandoned this year.
And so obviously that's going to support this idea of a much smaller wheat crop this year. I mean, should be supportive of the price. I mean, we always say with the wheat market that for there to be a rally, there has to be a disaster somewhere. Unfortunately, it's here. So yeah, we have seen the price move up. And boy, I mean, you talk about when that WASDE report come out, it was a limit up day in the winter wheat market.
45
When was
cents.
the last time we saw a limit update? I didn't even know what the limit was. I had to look up what the limit was.
He called me a liar. I said it was limit up today. He goes, it was only 45 cents higher. I said that was the limit.
That's the limit.
He said whatever.
So it's just tough. I mean, we just feel for our wheat growers right now that are dealing with this market, and not to mention what's going on the input costs. Obviously, we've seen wheat falling pretty closely with whatever crude oil's doing. So yeah, the wheat market's higher, but the fertilizer and the fuel cost more. So don't feel like we're coming out ahead. There's a lot of challenges right now in this market.
Talking just about the grains in general, I feel like every time we do one of our market news summaries or a mid-session report, it's literally just looking at what the crude oil prices, what's happening in Iran. It's just frustrating sometimes on how much outside pressure can swing the market that fast. It just kind of baffles me. You never really dive into it until you pay attention, in the morning, afternoon, and evening, how much of a swing those outside pressures can really affect it. And it obviously it's hurting producers in a time when they're already hurting, they're already facing higher supplies. And then you take into the fact the Iran issues that are happening over there, and we've seen diesel jump up 50% in the last 2 months. And it's just like, yeah, it's awesome to see a 45-cent swing in the wheat contracts, but is that making a difference right now? Probably not.
Well, you talk about the situation in Iran, and I have a friend who farms up in the Golden Triangle who said, I'm kind of waiting to see what happens later in the year in the Southern Hemisphere when they move into their wheat crop, because they don't produce fertilizer like we do here. They import almost all their nitrogen in places like Australia, Brazil, Argentina. And so if this situation stays in the Strait of Hormuz the way it is, and they can't get nitrogen, what are they going to do? Just not raise a crop, try to switch to something else? It could drive the price even higher.
And that's what a lot of economists are saying is this, obviously it's had a drastic effect in the last month and a half, right in the middle of spring planting season. But we're not really going to see the full effects until next year because a lot of those producers already had their orders purchased and whatnot for fertilizer. Of course, there's a big consideration on shipping and whatnot. But like you said, yeah, Southern Hemisphere is going to see it here shortly, 2027. How delayed are we going to be on those fertilizer supplies if we are? And so there's so much outside noise, I feel like, that controls that. But continuing on with the World Ag Supply and Demand Estimates report, of course, the wheat was the spotlight as we saw the limits up on the board, but corn planting pace hasn't been too affected by some of the rains recently. Of course, the corn is 76% planted in the recent crop conditions and crop progress report. Soybeans at 73%. We're below our corn production from last year, but still like the second largest in the last 15 years on record. So going to be a big corn crop again this year. Soybeans, I think they were right up there as well.
Well, and we're talking about these drought issues. One thing I think we should mention is the wind that we saw here in just the last week. I mean, I've not been to Northeast Montana in a little bit, but I've seen some pictures of just the topsoil blown off. We're going to have to call North Dakota and see if they'll send our topsoil back. And you just see fields with the seed just laying there bare, just blown off completely. This is an issue that I think is being somewhat overlooked, especially for how that's going to affect spring wheat production, because most of your spring wheat in the country comes from North Dakota and Montana.
You remember the movie The Mummy with Brendan Fraser?
Yeah.
It was like that. It was like a wall of sand just going across the High Line. It seemed cinematic. It was almost didn't seem real of how much dirt went into the air. That dust storm was huge. Dust Bowl, almost. It was crazy.
Worse than the Dust Bowl, yeah. I would think, or at least the same as.
Yep.
And sorry, go ahead, Andy.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to take us in a slightly different direction.
Same here.
But we've been talking about imports, beef imports, but grain imports are a thing here. Have you guys seen that the price of U.S. wheat is so much higher than the rest of the world that we've actually heard that mills in the southeastern U.S. are importing wheat from the European Union because it's cheaper to do so than buy it in the U.S.
I think there's like a $2.50 bushel per bushel discount when you buy out
Wild.
of country.
Yeah, that's what I was reading the other day is the Paris milling got purchased from Southeast U.S. and it was $2.15 difference just from that recent rally, and it's just another thing.
I know those guys are in business and they're watching the economics of it, but gosh, it's frustrating when we have such price issues with our own wheat that we're importing wheat from Poland or wherever it comes from.
It's so frustrating sometimes.
and speaking of a global perspective on these grain prices, we got to talk also about the U.S. meeting between China and Trump, recently.
Yep.
I mean, that had a big influence. They're going to say they're going to purchase $17 billion annually of ag products for the next 3 years. And that apparently is going to be on top of I think it was 25 million metric tons of soybeans that they committed to buying last October or November, whenever they had their last meeting. So a lot of optimism started this week. You get towards the latter half and the middle part of this week, and it kind of seems like that optimism's pulling back a little bit in the markets.
I think just starting to focus more on the forecast, the weather conditions as we're at the end of spring planting. It seemed, 76% of corn is planted. Soybeans were over 70%. So now we're just really watching the weather. Of course, we said the wind and the drought conditions a big issue. North Dakota, though, however, you brought it up about the wind conditions. They're about the only state right now in the pasture and rangeland conditions report that look like they're getting fairly adequate moisture. They were leading the country. I think it was over 60% of their pasture rangeland rated good to very good. Nebraska, over 80% of their pasture and rangeland is poor to very poor, with only 4% rated good to excellent. Montana and Wyoming, they're 40 to 50% poor to very poor conditions. So it's just going to be a big concern here as we continue to head into summertime, and we've already seen an early start to the wildfire season, and it's going to be a little scary for what could come later this summer if we don't have a wet June, July. And I know we had a really wet July last year that helped out quite a bit, but hopefully it's not too late and we're too far behind.
Well, Colton, we call that next year country because we're optimistic that things are going to get better. You just threw a whole big dose of cold water and pessimism on us there. But I mean, there are a lot of challenges out there, but that's why we call it next year country, because we are confident that it's going to get better. Egg producers are resilient out here, and boy, we're going to meet these challenges, and we're confident in the future of agriculture.
And we're going to talk about it each and every week on our Next Year Country podcast. We appreciate you joining us. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast, as next week we're going to send Colton on the road to Great Falls to the Montana Stock Growers Association mid-year meeting. Sounds like that might be a pretty good conversation there as well, because there's some topics that are some kind of hot button topics for stock grower members as well.
Yeah, and I think Dougie Hall and I are going to be at the Sip and Dip swimming on Thursday night from about 10 to 11:30, so you can catch us both there. But yeah, like you said, they'll set their policy for the year, so looking forward to that. Of course, you can see a lot of the latest headlines on our website. I'm sure we'll be talking about exempt wells quite a bit and see some other policy directives that'll come out of that meeting.
For Colton Young and Colter Brown, I'm Andy Schwab, Northern Ag Network on Next Year Country podcast.